welcome. So today's session, I know we're running fairly behind, but it's still a session that I think is important and I really want to talk about. Today's session is about turning your passion into your purpose. And I think that comes in various forms. So I want to begin with asking you guys a question that we'll touch on a little bit later. But what do you feel is your biggest fear? What do you feel like is something that is so crippling or that has the capacity to prevent you from going either way, from moving forward in any capacity? I think for all of us, we have a general overview of what fear means to us, but I think as a commonality between everyone, it's a fear of failure. It's a fear of not fitting in, of not being enough, of not being what we thought we could be or what we have the potential to become. You know, growing up, we're taught that everything's going to be okay, and that some sort of struggle means defeat, or it means failure, or it means that you're not doing the best that you could be doing. Whereas if you look at it differently, if you choose to look at it differently, failure or struggling can mean you're learning something new, or it's an opportunity for change, or an opportunity to welcome something new into your life. So for those of you who don't know me, as I was introduced, my name is Jayel Lewis. I'm the owner of Jayel Fitness. It's a women's only personal training and events company in Center City, Philadelphia. I am the creator of the blog Inspirationally Fit, where everybody has a story. So I feel like every single person has a story. They just may not be at the point where they're willing or able to share it just yet. So before I get into my story and who I am and how I evolved as a person and who I am today, I just think it's very important to look back on the person that you were and realize that the person that you are today was not that same person. It wasn't the person that you were a year ago, a month ago, a couple of years ago. And to not feel like you have to take accountability to be that person, to not, you know, hold on to those traits or those, you know, bad decisions or those bad memories or those awful feelings that you once had. So there was a point in my life when I was asked the same questions time and time again. And those questions were, Jayel, are you happy? Yes, I would respond. Jayel, are you happily married? Yes, I would respond. Jayel, are you so happy that you're living abroad? Yes. And I answered yes repetitively without even thought to all of those questions, when in reality, the answer to every single one of those questions were no. So this was a point in time where I wasn't only lying to myself, but I was lying to other people. I wasn't being my authentic self, but it was during a time that I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what that entailed, because for so long we're taught that we're supposed to live our life by this book. This magical book that I don't know who created it, I don't know what purpose it serves, I don't know the following chapters, but it's this book of how we're supposed to go through life, what makes us successful, how we're supposed to feel, what our next steps are supposed to be. So as a generality, it's basically going to college, getting a good job, finding your partner, getting married, living happily ever after. And I think, as we all know as adults, that that's not usually how it plays out, you know, that there's more to that story. So I've learned that through my past, I've created who I am today. And I know that we all have a story, and again, we don't always want to share our story, but it's something that is necessary at some point in our lives to allow ourselves to release whatever that is that wasn't true, wasn't honest, and wasn't authentic. So I began my young adulthood with a false sense of expectations. That was something that I think was set up for me, something that I felt I was entitled to, something that I strived to be, and something that I didn't do. So, you know, we're still living our life according to this book, this magical book. Welcome, ladies. And I think we're working so hard to live our lives according to this plan that either our parents have planned out, or that someone above us has planned out, or that someone a little older, has told us that we need to be following this plan and go according to this in order to feel successful. So my chapter 1 really begins with graduating college. So I graduated from Westchester University in 2007. I earned a degree in exercise science and nutrition. And I was convinced upon graduation that I would not use that degree. I thought for sure that I would go into pharmaceutical sales or into a nonprofit. And my friends all thought I was crazy. They all thought that I had a passion and that I was supposed to be in fitness. And I laughed at them and I was like, you guys have no idea what you're talking about. I'm 21 years old. I've got this figured out. I know everything that I'm supposed to do. And as I was going through, the whole work experience thing, I realized that I wasn't supposed to be in a nonprofit. I wasn't supposed to be in pharmaceutical sales. But when you're younger, your friends have a tendency to influence you. And so no matter what they said and continued to tell me, I would just chalk it up as a loss. I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about. I got this. I'm an adult. I can figure this out. So I didn't think much of it until one night I woke up and I had a dream. My dream, ironically enough, was that I should do something in fitness. And I swore that no one ever told me this before. So I reached out to my friends. I texted, no, I don't know if we were texting at that point. So I reached out to my friends and I was like, guys, you're never gonna believe what I think I'm supposed to do. And they were like, what? And I said, I'm supposed to do something in fitness. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that entails. Mind you, this is in 2007, so there's not really like a full career that you're supposed to follow or something that you're supposed to like strive to be specifically. So when I told them the news, they all laughed at me. And I said, why are you laughing at me? And they told me, well, we told you this several years ago. And I said, well, I'm just learning it on my own. So I truly believe that in that moment, fitness found me. It found me for a greater meaning. It found me for a greater purpose. And no matter what my friends told me, it was a reminder that I had to be ready and I had to be accepting of what was to come my way. So people can tell you things and people can say, I see this for you. I think you should do this. I think you should go that route. But if you're not ready or you don't feel it in your heart or you're not passionate about it, you're never going to wake up and find it until it finds you. My struggle with fitness was that I grew up dancing for 8 years. I did ballet for 8 years. I ran track in high school. And I never really struggled with weight. So when you come into the fitness world and you're new and you're in shape, people don't always look at you as someone that necessarily knows what they're talking about, because I didn't have that relatability factor. I never struggled with weight. I never struggled with food. If anything, it was me not being able to gain weight, me, having food allergies growing up and not being able to eat. So I was almost at the opposite end of the spectrum, where I didn't know how to relate to someone that wanted to change their lives for the better when I had always lived this life that seemed better in a sense for me. So while I was having issues with connecting with people, and while I had just graduated college, and my newly awarded degree in hand, I landed myself a desk job at a personal training studio. So that wasn't what I had hoped to do. It wasn't what I aspired to do. But it was something that just was. And in this personal training studio, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about people. And going to school, they can teach you the books and the foundations and the principles of everything. But until you have that one-on-one experience, you really don't know what you want to do or what you feel connected to. So I would see the other trainers as I was sitting at the front desk day in and day out helping people. I would hear their stories in the background about how they feel so much better about themselves, how they feel like they're like changing their lives for the better. And that was something that I wanted. I didn't necessarily know how to go about doing it, but that was something I wanted. I wanted more. So I took my time and I slowly began to train a few clients here and there at the personal training studio. And this was something that I could get used to. This was something that I could I could really see myself doing, because it was no longer just about me, it was about helping other people. So I didn't really feel fully accomplished, because it was like a little bit of the front desk hustle, a little bit of training people, still didn't know like where I belonged. And I knew that I wanted more. And at the time, my life seemed to be really easy. My parents were still kind of supporting me. It was my first job. It was like, okay, not so much pressure. And at the time, the things that did scare me were that I had fallen in love and that I had decided to compete in a figure competition. So putting myself out there and being vulnerable was something that scared me to death. And then stepping on stage in a really tiny bikini in front of my parents and my friends also scared me to death. But I thought, you know what, like what's more fearful than fear itself? Why should I prevent myself from doing these things when it's just the idea of fear? It's nothing specific that's preventing me from doing these things. So as I stepped on stage in my really tiny bikini, I ended up being awarded a first place trophy. And this made me feel like, you know what, like I can do this. A couple of months before I was fearful of this, but this is something that I can do. And it seemed as though all of my fears, I was tackling them. I was overcoming them. And it was during that time that I had made a conscious decision to move to Maryland, where my boyfriend was stationed at the time. And it was like, okay, you know, everything was kind of making sense and falling into alignment, and it seemed to be going well. But I think as individuals, more often than not, we talk ourselves out of the possibility of winning, the possibility of feeling accomplished, the possibility of what we are actually capable of doing, or what our highest or truest potential is. Because so often other people talk us out of that, and we listen, and we choose to accept that for what it is. So as I packed up my stuff and moved to Maryland, I was thinking, okay, so what's next for me? You know, one of my other fears was leaving my cushioned job where I didn't have to work that hard, but was connecting with people, but still knew I wanted more. So when I got to Maryland, I decided that I would look into the gyms that were around. And we were living in suburbia at the time, and so there was only one big box gym around, which will remain nameless in case they ever try to sue me. But it was a big box gym, and I had never worked in a big box gym before. And I remember going in and giving them my application to be a personal trainer, and they accepted it, and we had an orientation. And that day during orientation, I didn't get a good feeling. What they were telling me was that you need to sell. You need to make sure, you know, you have client retention. You need to make sure that these people are coming in no matter what. You know, these are the numbers that you need to reach. This is what you have to do. But never once did they say anything about connecting with the individual. Never once did they say that you have the potential to change someone's life, that you are here to help someone see the potential in themselves that they don't see. They didn't say all the things that for me was so important when it comes to personal training. Someone comes to you as a vulnerable being. They need help. They're asking for help. And I saw it as the company was just asking for numbers and money. And to me, it's so much more about that. So on my quote unquote first day, I decided to quit. It wasn't for me. It didn't make sense. I still didn't have a job, but I knew like I couldn't put my energy towards this because I have nothing to give you, because I don't feel comfortable with your principles. So while living in Maryland, I was kind of out of place, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I had a passion for helping others. And I knew that I needed more. I knew that I wanted change. So after I quit my 5 hours at the gym, I decided to kind of see what else was out there. And I was hopeful, and I was really, really hopeful that other people didn't just perceive fitness and health as just a way to make money. So luckily, I ended up finding another job, working in corporate fitness, but with the government. So that was something that I really loved. So I got to teach classes, I got to oversee people, I got to manage people, I got to talk to the members, and that was almost encouraged to like speak to people and say hi and ask them how their day was. How are you feeling? Like, how are you recovering from your injury? Things that were never something that was awarded or that was looked at as a good thing. So I think so often we get stuck in helping others that we fail to help ourselves. It's so much easier to help someone else because you don't have to think about what's going on in your life. You don't have to deal with the stressors. You don't have to deal what's pressuring you, what's giving you anxiety. But when it comes to helping someone else, it comes like second nature. Let me help you. Let me help my neighbor. Let me help someone else. When in reality, we need to focus more on helping ourselves, because if we don't help ourselves, we can't really fully help someone else. So my life was still going somewhat according to this plan, this magical book that never really existed, but it's still going. And my job was, I was loving my job, I was loving my life, I was loving my boyfriend at the time, and things were going well. When I met my boyfriend, probably 2 years beforehand, we met at a bar, which I won't recommend, but we met at a bar in Boston. And when we met, we had an instant connection. And he told me that he was in the military. He was in the Air Force, and that was something that I knew that if we were to become serious, that I would be moving, that my life would be uprooted, that we would have a constant form of movement. And I was okay with that. And I was okay with that until the time came when he got orders. And his orders were to Germany. And I'll be honest, I had hopes of staying in Maryland because I felt like my life was finally making sense. I was where I was supposed to be. I was doing what I was supposed to do. And then it just kind of felt like everything was getting uprooted. But at that time, I was already committed. We had been engaged for probably a year. And so I was committed to my job, but I was more committed to my future husband because I wanted to make a life. I wanted to continue this book of everything going according to plan and to make my parents happy and to go through life as we're supposed to or as we're taught. So clearly our plans versus God plans were not on the same page, but that's okay. I accepted it for what it was. We got married shortly thereafter and started packing, and he moved to Germany. So we made 2 big announcements that we were married and that we were moving, and it was a reality shock. I'll never forget my last day at work. The people were amazing. They had fake tattoos made that said "Body Big Jayel." It was a bittersweet moment because it's everything that I could have asked for, but I was also sad because I felt like I was starting my career path, but I was leaving so that he could continue his. So he left about 3 weeks to a month before me so that he could get settled, find our house. And I moved back in with my parents for about 3 weeks. And if you've moved out of your parents' house and then moved back in, that is not what you want to do. But I realized it was only for 3 weeks and that it would be fine. So I moved back in with them, and I would talk to my husband every single day. And I would journal, and I would write about, okay, what's life going to be like? What does life entail for me? What's next for me? What does Germany even look like? I didn't even know where Germany was on a map until we got orders to move there. So I was kind of just envisioning what my life was going to turn into. And I was open to that. So the day came where it was time for me to move. My parents and my best friends dropped me off at the airport, and I said my final goodbyes to them as I stepped on a plane, sat on the plane for 8 hours, and had no idea what my life was about to be. I questioned if I was doing the right thing. I was doing the right thing for myself, more so than my marriage. And my husband picked me up, and I was starving. Surprisingly, we stopped at an Italian restaurant, even though we were in Germany. I had never been in Germany. And we drove to our new home. And Germany was nothing like the United States. I mean, of course, there was a McDonald's. But there were also castles and open fields and hiking trails that were like beyond belief. So, I thought maybe I can settle in here. Maybe this is a place that I can get used to. So, once the dust settled, he went back to work. And in the military, people that they're married, when they're married to someone, we're called dependents. And that never sat well with me because I didn't feel that I was dependent on him for everything. But he was able to easily go back into work, go back into his routine, go back into meeting people and doing what he did, while I sat at home and wondered, what the hell am I doing? Not only was I being called a dependent, but I had just left something where I didn't feel dependent on anyone other than myself. And I was back in this situation of not knowing what I was supposed to do, what the next chapter was, what was in store for me. And so I began to feel some sort of resentment. I began to feel like I left my life so that you could continue on with yours. And I know that we're supposed to be a unit, but I'm still supposed to be able to feel certain things, or I'm supposed to be able to accomplish things on my own. I didn't feel like that at the time. I felt lost, I felt confused, I felt isolated. If you guys have ever traveled abroad and you don't know the language, it's very difficult. We weren't living on base, we were living in a village where all of my neighbors spoke German. I still to this day don't know what they said to me every single day. It got to a point where I was depressed and I was lonely, and I tried to meet people, but those people weren't necessarily my people. They were military wives that had children, and there's nothing wrong with children, but I wasn't at that point in my life. I didn't want children. I met other people and I just didn't mesh well with them. I just didn't click, and so I isolated myself even more, which looking back was probably one of the worst things I could have done. I was personally disconnected and I didn't know how to express my own emotions. So even though I was trying with every fiber of my being to pull myself closer to something more meaningful and more powerful, I realized that my husband was pulling further and further away from me. We were two people living under the same roof with completely opposite desires, and it was very weird. I decided, you know what, I'm a fixer. I fix things. I can help people. I fix problems. So I thought that if I was able to just throw myself back into the working world, that everything would be okay. I'd make it right. So I decided to enroll in classes, prerequisites to get my master's. So I was doing that in the evenings. And things were going all right until one day I came home and I sat on our overly stuffed couch, and my husband was sitting across from me, and he looked me in the eyes and he said, I want a divorce. And at that time, I almost became numb. I didn't really have any feelings. I didn't have any emotions. I didn't start crying. I looked at him, thought about it, and I said, okay. And for several weeks, we continued on this life of uncertainty, we were living under the same roof, going along, our daily routine as though nothing had changed, but really everything had changed. So everything was fine, and we were still pretending that everything was fine until the day that he moved out. And he didn't tell me where he was moving. He didn't tell me who he was moving with. He didn't tell me, where he was moving to. And mind you, I'm living in this foreign country, and it's almost a year that I've been there, but I still don't have any real friends. I don't have any family. I didn't have a job. I was trying to figure out who I was. When my husband always knew who he was, but I was no longer a part of that equation. So the day came that he moved out, and that's when it hit me, the reality of it all, the sadness of it all. I begged and I pleaded for us to try to work on things, but he had made his mind up that he was moving on without me. And I was still sitting in our 5-bedroom house, not knowing how to even pick up the pieces. I didn't even know where the pieces were. And that's when kind of some of the downward spiral started, because we had both come from divorced parents, and something that we always said was that we weren't going to do this. We weren't going to put ourselves or eventually our kids through this type of pain. But it was happening. So I was left to pick up the pieces and figure everything out on my own. And I didn't know if I should stay or if I should go. And I think that's a very easy question for someone on the outside looking in to say, of course, get your ass and go, go home. But I was committed. I, at this point, had been in a relationship with someone for about 5 years. And for me, when I said my vows, I meant them. So it's I want to work on things. I want to make this right. I'm a fixer. I want to make this right. So for months, I was lying to my friends and my family that everything was okay. People would call me. I would call them. Yeah, everything's fine. Where's Michael? Oh, I don't know. He's playing rugby. I would just come up with anything to almost make myself feel better so that I didn't have to come and talk about my truths. I didn't have to speak or hear in my own head what was truly going on. I didn't have to face it. I didn't have to come face to face with my own reality by sharing that with someone else. There were days that I didn't want to wake up. There were days that I prayed that I didn't have to feel as much pain that I did. There were days when I would drink a bottle of wine and hope that I wouldn't wake up because the amount of pain was just way too much for me to endure, and I was on my own. And I still didn't really have any friends, so it's a very dark place that you can find yourself in. And more than anything, you feel like a failure. And when you're alone and you don't have your family and you don't have your friends, you know, you have these thoughts that are constantly running through your mind of, well, I've failed. And that was part of the reason that I didn't want to tell anybody, was I didn't want my parents to think that my marriage was a failure, or that I was a failure, or that I let them down, or that, you know, this book that I've been following according to plan is no longer. So it's funny looking back on things during that time. Before I left for Germany, my biggest fears were leaving my desk job and stepping on stage in a bikini, where now my biggest fears were my life coming, you know, to a halt and having to lie or telling my family that everything has changed or that everything I've been telling you isn't the truth. But that's when I started learning that you never truly know how strong you are until strong is the only option that you have. And I was in a position where I was choosing to believe this life. I was choosing to believe that it was true. And for a long time, I believed it to be true, that I wasn't good enough, that it wasn't enough, that I wasn't giving enough, that I had done something. And I realized that it takes two in any sort of marriage or relationship to make things work or to make things fail. But I was convinced that, like, it was all me, that I had to carry this weight on my shoulders. And it was killing me inside. I went to the hospital many times, and it all ended up being panic attacks or anxiety. I had a stomach procedure because I was convinced that I had an ulcer, and they told me it was just anxiety. So when I found out that my husband had already moved on and he was seeing someone new, I wasn't necessarily surprised. It's something that I almost expected, because there was a time that I prayed for it. And I know that sounds crazy, but I prayed for it because I wanted a way for me to leave. I wanted something to say to me, like, it's okay, you can let this go, and you can move on. And I felt like that would be the only way that I could do that. So, I mean, I was still emotionally and physically sick, and I knew that I needed change, but I had no clue what that meant. I had no clue where to start. You know, I still had loose ends to tie up. I was still in school. I didn't want to leave that. You know, I wanted to go on my own terms and not on his terms. And I came home from school one evening, and my phone rang. And on the other end was a woman's voice, and she said, "Hi, my name's Maya." And I said, "Hi." And she said, you know, my trainer is moving, and you came highly recommended. I'd like to start training 3 times a week with you. Can we start Monday at 9 a.m.? I didn't know this woman. I didn't know that anyone really knew that I was a trainer. And I wasn't fully convinced that this is something that I could do. But she kept going and she kept talking, and I just said, okay, I'll see you on Monday at 9 a.m. And so Sunday night, I couldn't sleep. I didn't know if this was something I could actually do. I didn't know if I could put on a face that everything was okay and help someone else, because at this point I couldn't even help my own self. So we started training, and Maya was a very let's get right to the point type of person. She wasn't much for talking. She was a lot about doing. So, you know, she was a badass. She was very strong, was very smart. She was also dependent. She owned her own business in Germany. She owned a hair salon, and she was killing it. And she was not only killing it professionally, but she was killing it personally in the gym. And so we had been training for a couple of months at this point, and she would always give it 100%, but there was this one day where she was giving it 110%. And I stopped her and I said, "What was that?" And she said, "What was what?" I said, what just happened?" And I said, "Something clicked." And she said, "Oh, I've been through a lot worse." And so I had to ask her, "Okay, what are you talking about?" And so she opened up to me, And she began to tell me the story of how she was in a physically abusive relationship for years, and how there came a point where she had to make a decision, that she knew that she had to make a choice that would ultimately save her life. And so one morning, she had 2 children. One morning, she knew when the bus came every morning to pick up the children, and she put the children on the bus, and she got on the bus and asked the bus driver not to say anything, and she never went back. So for me, that was just a moment that I'll never forget. That was her opening up her story. That was her saying, it's okay if you feel like you failed. It's okay, to feel this way, and that no matter what, you have a choice to make. It's not going to be an easy choice. It's going to be a difficult choice, but you have a choice to make. Maya was the one that opened up the world of truth to me. So we always live in this truth, but we don't always live it, breathe it. We're just living in it, and we often don't share it because we're scared of what others may think or how others may judge us. And our relationship began to evolve even more through that. Her story, in a sense, ended up becoming a part of my story because it was someone that I could trust, someone that almost, someone that I met through the gym that allowed me to see that, hey, I've been through much worse, but look where I am today. And no, I wasn't in a physically abusive relationship, but I was in a mentally abusive relationship. And Maya paved the way for me to see that I needed change and that I did have a choice and that I could continue to live this lie, which I think so many of us do for so long until it gets to a point of you just have to admit to yourself and to others what's truly going on. And you have to be honest. And I think it's so hard for us to be honest because, again, that's accepting ourselves as defeat and as failure. And this allowed me to create a new outlook on failure. And again, failure is what we make of it. It's how we overcome it. It's what we choose to see as failure. But I chose to start believing that failure was something that we could change. Failure was something that doesn't necessarily mean that you failed. It means that you're learning something differently. It means you've put your all into something and it didn't work, but that you can do it again and it'll be better. So I knew I had to make the ultimate decision, and I knew that this wouldn't happen overnight. But I also felt a pull from the universe of being pushed into something greater. And that's when I felt like I was being pushed into my passion. So on one side of the spectrum, I had myself falling into my passion, which was training and connecting with people. And on the other end, it was, I'm about to lose my husband in a relationship that I've been in for 6 years. When I started speaking the truth and I started hearing my own words and my own voice and not sharing it necessarily with others, I learned that, you know what, this is something that can set me free. This is something that will allow me to feel that I don't have to feel the weight of the world anymore. So my husband ended up moving back in so that we could give it one last hurrah, one last try. But nothing worked, nothing connected. It's same thing. We were 2 separate people living under the same roof, going about our daily routine. And that's not the life that I wanted to live. We didn't have children, I didn't have any huge commitments. And so I was I can no longer live this life. So I woke up one morning, he was already, out of bed, and I went downstairs, sat on our overly sized stuffed couch across from him, and I looked him in the eyes and I said, I'm leaving. And at that point, I knew that I had to stick to my words and I had to get out. And so 2 weeks later, I was on a plane. And ironically enough, he dropped me off at the airport. We said our goodbyes. I got on the plane with someone that I had met in Germany who ended up becoming my best friend. And if it weren't for him, I probably wouldn't have gotten on that flight because I knew I had someone to depend on. And so I looked at my husband, I said goodbye. There was no see you later. There was no I love you. There was no I'll see you when you get back. And then I hopped on the plane. I had 5 vodka sodas. And I ended up in DC and then back to Philly. But it was during that time that I realized that my secrets were keeping me sick. Not sharing my struggles and not sharing my journeys with anyone were killing me inside. And I knew that I had to tell my mom, and I knew I had to tell my parents and my friends and my clients. And I told my clients before I left Germany, but I needed to respect the time that I was in, so I didn't tell them all of the details. I knew that I had to tell my mom, and I told my mom, and of course she was confused, but she was understanding and welcoming. And my dad was the one that was always so proud of me, that it was always, you know, at every track meet and every dance recital and all of those things. And so I was like, how the hell am I going to tell my dad this? When he would call me every day and I would tell him everything is fine. So I came home, and it was weird at first. I had been living in Germany for about 2.5 years and came back to Philly. Didn't know you could be culture shocked in a city where you grew up. People were loud, people were rude, people would hit on you in the most obscene ways. Some of the streets were pretty dirty. I was just like, where am I? What's going on? But I knew that I had to meet with my dad. So I met with my dad for lunch. He was surprised that I was home, but we were having a family reunion around that time frame, so he just thought that I came home a little bit earlier. I thought that I was going to pee my pants, have a heart attack, and throw up simultaneously before I told my dad the news that I had left my husband. And so I mustered up the courage, and I told him that I had left, and I had left for good. And despite what was going on in my head of how he was going to say, like, I can't believe you did this, you're doing the wrong thing, he asked me one question, and the question was, do you think you made the right decision? And I said, yes. And he said, are you happy? And I said, I will be. And that was the first time in years that I had said yes, and I had truly meant it. That I wasn't hiding, you know, behind my facade. That I wasn't hiding behind my beautiful life of living abroad and traveling and meeting all these wonderful people. And in that moment, I knew that, like, everything would be okay because my dad was on my side. So coming back to the States, I had no clients. The only money that I had was the money that was in my savings account. And I spent a lot of that traveling, which I don't regret. But, you know, not having clients, coming from a place where you had a full book of clients and a waiting list. And I felt like I worked so hard when I was living in DC and Maryland, and worked so hard in Germany to kind of figure out who I was or what my purpose was, and feel like you're, you know, sometimes you feel like you're always being pulled away from that purpose. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a full book of clients. I didn't know anyone other than my friends that I went to high school with and my family that were in Philadelphia. But, you know, when you say goodbye to someone that you've been with for 6 years and they're still alive, it's very hard to articulate a loss of someone that's still living. But that's something that I had to start doing. So the moment that I left, I decided that was me taking flight. That was me opening up my wings. That was me getting really uncomfortable with being, that was me getting really comfortable with being uncomfortable. So I'm not going to lie, it's still a struggle at times. You still question, did I make the right decision? What would have happened if I stayed? What would happen if I go, like if I went, what would have happened? But for me, it's speaking your truths. And fear is something that will always be there, but how you react to fear is something that you can control. And by sharing your truths and speaking your true story, it allows others to feel comfortable speaking their own stories. And yes, I'm a trainer, but I now feel like I'm a healer, I'm a motivator, I'm an educator. But I never truly felt confident saying those things until I went through all of the crappy stuff that I went through. And in a sense, I have my ex-husband to thank for showing me that I had a voice, for showing me that, you know, I was capable, showing me that I could do better and that I could do more. And I also have myself to thank for making the ultimate choice or making the ultimate sacrifice to leave and to go. And I think during those times we feel like we're supposed to be broken, we feel like we're supposed to be failed, but how we react to that is ultimately up to us. And we can either look at it as a setback or we can look at it as a comeback. And I think that we always have to keep in mind that we're not alone on this journey. I think no matter what we're going through, at some points we always feel like we're alone, but we're not. as long as we have the ability to share something, a part, a component of our stories. So for me, it was about paving the way for others and just realizing or allowing them to see that they have a voice and they have positivity. And I think that no matter what, we all fear pain. We all fear some sort of hurt. And it may all have the same effect on us, but we feel it in a different way or for a different cause. But by healing myself, I began to realize that I can heal others. And then it's a constant journey. But what we all have to remember is that we all have a purpose. And no matter what that purpose is or how we get to that purpose, that we have one. And it's going to appear in various forms. It's going to appear through heartache. It's going to appear through hardships. But just remembering that you're here for a reason is something that you have to feel deeply rooted in and truly believe in. So as cliche as it sounds, it is a beautiful struggle, and it is something that you will struggle through. But it's something that in order to go through, you have to grow through. So, I mean, I shared my story with you guys not as a sob story, but that's my story. And I know that each one of us sitting in this room have a story, and parts of it we may have shared with others, parts of it we haven't. But if you just allow yourself to say, you know what, like, maybe I didn't make the right choice, maybe I did make a mistake, but if you are open and honest with yourself first and others later, you have the power to help so many other people. And you know, I sit before you today not as the person that I am, or not as the person that I was, but as the person that I am today. And I truly feel that without going through what I did, I wouldn't be as successful as I am. I own a very successful personal training company. And I came here and I started off with 0 clients. I have a full book and I have a waiting list now. I've been on the cover of magazines. I, you know, grace the pages of fitness magazines and fitness catalogs. And I'm sponsored by various companies, but you know, that's all great. But to me, what's most important is continuing to share the story of getting there and to continue to educate people on, you know, their purpose and to follow your passion no matter what it is, no matter what mold or box you think it's supposed to fit in and it doesn't. And you keep trying to fit this puzzle into this piece and it's not making sense. But I want you to know it's not making sense for a reason. It's not making sense because maybe it's not supposed to make sense right now, but it will later. So whatever it is that you're truly feeling like, give it time to evolve, give it time. When you're feeling at your lowest low, know that you can be at your highest high, but just go through whatever it is that you're going through, talk to someone about it. And don't think of everything that you're doing as a failure. Think of it as a way to learn, to teach others, to motivate someone, to inspire someone. So I'm going to ask you guys one last question that we started off with. And if you guys want to write this down, or I'd love for you to share it. What do you feel like is your biggest fear that's kind of keeping you from being the person that you want to be, or keeping you from, you know, sharing your truths with someone else? So if anyone wants to share that, that would be great. Yeah.
Not working hard enough. Not like just getting down in the dirt and doing the stuff that's going to take to make your dreams come true.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of us want to work harder. It's just the execution part. You know, it's like, I know I can do better. I know I can do this. I know what I'm capable of, but it's actually, you know, producing that and living in that. And if you know that, you know, all it takes is you just implementing something on a daily basis in order to get to that. Because, I mean, you know what you want to do. You even know where you want to live, you told me. So it's just, you know, realizing that you matter, and that it doesn't necessarily matter what your parents think or what your friends think, or if it makes sense to you, do it.
So you're actually correct. It's the execution.
Yes.
It's executing. Exactly.
Yep. Anybody else want to share with me on this wonderful Saturday? All right. Well, I mean, even if you guys write it down and kind of think about that as you go home, I think it's a very powerful thing. So I just want to say thank you for joining me today. I know you guys are starving. I'm sorry we started late. But I hope you got something out of this.
Yes.
And thank you for being here with me today. My name, yes, thank you.
I would also like to say, Doc, you have shared your story, your time, your talk, your honesty, and I really appreciate all that what you said. I'm sure each and every one of us got something out of what you said.
Thank you.
So take the ball and run with it. And I think for me, the biggest thing would be just the execution part, you know, in terms of knowing
Sure.
what you want, laying the groundwork down, and
Right.
just doing it.
Yeah.
Just doing it. Because we all have it in us to do. So all we have to do is just doing it. Whatever that thing is that you choose to want to do, just do it and share, talk about it.
I mean, I think a lot of it is also just giving yourself the opportunity that you give others. You know, so giving yourself that time, giving yourself time to work on yourself and not necessarily helping everybody else. Like coming back to you and like saying like, you know, I need this too. You know, I need my tank to be full before I can help you fill up yours.
And it's okay too to take care of yourself and to be selfish
Right.
and say, hey, I just don't feel
It's
like
not
answering the phone.
right,
doing
and it's, you know,
something.
it's I don't even look at it as selfish. I
Okay.
just look at it as like powering yourself up, filling yourself up, so that you can truly give to others. Because how many times has someone called you at the end of the day and you're like, I cannot do this.
Or you thought you were having a free, careless day, and then someone calls, and now you got all the stress on you, like, oh my gosh, I was
Exactly.
okay to call.
Right.
Thank you again.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And it's really amazing that a common theme is that failure with people who are successful, that's what makes them great. It always takes them to a path that puts them where they are, to make them successful.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, oftentimes we as people that feel like they've failed or they've been through something, we put that energy of not feeling like it was enough or not feeling like I did everything that I could have done into something greater. So, yeah.
Great story.
I don't think I'm collecting those.
Yes, I'm collecting the vows sheets. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.